the more we thought about it and the more we thought about how audio production could be easier and faster and more fun by changing the editing and creation paradigm, the more excited we got about the possibilities.
Podcast Junkies, episode 156. Welcome back. I'm your host, Harry Duran. Weekly conversations with movers and shakers in the podcasting world. The majority of the time, it's podcast hosts who are just kicking butt and have amazing stories to tell about their journey. And every once in a while, it's an interesting conversation with someone who's doing something related in the podcasting field, like this week's guest. But first, in case you missed last week's show, we spoke to the one and only Cliff Ravenscraft, also known as Podcast Answer Man, now host of the Cliff Ravenscraft Show. Cliff holds a special place in my heart. He was the inspiration, one of the inspirations for me at New Media Expo in 2014, along with the likes of Pat Flynn, episode 150, by the way. And he gave a talk that really got me moving. And I spoke to the guy who introduced him as a speaker, Chris Murphy. Shout out to Chris Murphy. And that's really the genesis story of the show. And so to have it come full circle, have him come on episode 155 last week, and to talk about his story, what he's doing, how he's inspiring me, how he's inspiring countless of people and countless of subscribers to his show. It was just an amazing conversation. I was definitely in fanboy mode and just super appreciative of his time and giving us the full hour. And I think that really allows us to dig in a little deeper with these conversations. I hope you enjoyed it if you listened to it. If you haven't commented on it, I'd love to hear some feedback. So this week, I alluded to a new guest that is not actually a podcast host. His name is Andrew Mason. You might recognize that name as the former CEO of Groupon, and that is one and the same. He is now the creator of a new application called Descript, and it's a transcription-based service with a twist. You can actually take the audio that's been imported and transcribed, and through only editing of the text file, you'll actually go back and update the waveform as well, the actual audio file, which I think is fantastic. He's raised $5 million from Andreessen Horowitz, and they're currently working out of San Francisco offices. So they've actually got positions open as well. So if you're interested in a job there, check out Descript.com about. But this is just a great conversation with Andrew. We touch upon his project that he embarked on after leaving Groupon. That was Detour, and that's location-based audio tours. We talked about what his idea was for that and how they started working with audio and how some of the things that he learned from launching Detour made its way into Descript. We talk about my first thoughts because I was able to test out the application, and we also learn about its machine learning capabilities. He tells us what the goal is for Descript in the future and how he's looking for Descript to be able to conduct phonetic analysis of words, which is pretty fascinating. We dive into a couple of his favorite podcasts. And we also talk about the person who showed him what hard work looks like. We discover what he's learned from previous experiences in his career, and he also shares with us what he learned about empathy and judgment while at Groupon. So a great conversation, and I was just really honored to have the opportunity. His team reached out to me, and I saw that there was an opportunity to mix this in with what's happening in the podcasting space, and I thought you guys would really, really enjoy it. As always, full show notes available at podcastjunkies.com/156. We've got timestamps of the episode, tweetable quotes that you can share with social media, and all the links mentioned in the show as well. We put a lot of love and care into these show notes, and so if you check them out and you see something or heard something that piqued your interest, you'll be sure to find it there. This episode is brought to you by Podbean. One of the ways you can maximize the ad revenue on your podcast is to use dynamic ad insertion. And Podbean released late last year a great tool to help you optimize your advertising opportunities. The Podbean Dynamic Ads Insertion Platform, it helps you maximize your ad revenue and minimize the work by automatically inserting the ads for you. But you control everything. You bring the ads, you decide on the slots, the duration, and more. So make sure you head on over to podbean.com/podcastjunkies for more details. Make sure you stay till the end of the episode where I reveal this week's retention hashtag. But for now, enjoy my conversation with Andrew. So, Andrew Mason, thank you so much for joining us on Podcast Junkies.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, regular listeners would probably be wondering why the former CEO of Groupon is on a show of, when we talk about podcasting. But regular listeners will know that it's an interesting world around podcasting. There's always new waves of renaissance that are happening, and it's maybe something that you've seen as well. It's been around for 10 years, as most people know, but there's really interesting things and new technologies happening, and I thought it would be a great opportunity to chat with you about something new you're working on called the Descript. But I think just maybe to start, what have you been seeing as you've been, you've obviously had, after leaving Groupon, and you started Detour, and now you've got this new application called Descript. But over that time, what have you seen in the podcasting space that has been interesting for you or has caught your eye?
So Detour is the company I started 4 years ago, and it's a location-based audio tours that uses the GPS in your phone. And, in addition to building the technology, we built a whole bunch of content. And they're effectively location-based podcasts. I mean, they're basically podcasts.
Yeah.
And very early on, I met Alex Bloomberg,
Yep.
who at the time had not yet started Gimlet. He had left Planet Money and was on the verge of starting Gimlet. And as he talks about this in startup, but I ended up investing in being one of the original investors, and it was mostly, this seems like a talented guy, and I want to stay close to podcasting because it's peripheral to what we're doing at Detour. And he saw what was coming. I certainly didn't. I was taken aback by the explosion that's occurred in the last 4 or 5 years in this podcasting renaissance. So it's been awesome on the sidelines, and now with Descript, we're really fully embracing and immersing ourselves in the podcasting world.
And so when was the intention when you started Detour that they would be as easily consumed as podcasts are right now, so available in all the different destinations and Apple Podcasts and obviously wherever else? I know that podcasts are appearing on Spotify now too. So had you thought about that when you started Detour?
Not for detours themselves, because detours are dynamically constructed, almost like a video game. So as you're walking around the environment, like when you download a detour in the Detour app, you're actually downloading probably 40 or 50 or more different audio assets. Mm-hmm. There's voiceover audio tracks for every little segment between every street corner before you get some kind of directions. Anytime there's a timing variable action that's going to take place. And then ambience are loaded in there as separate tracks as well, and they're all triggered independently, much as it would work in a video game. So it was really designed to be an on-location experience. And in fact, we've resisted the idea of making it available, those as a pure podcast, because they're written for place in a way that it's just not the best way to learn about a subject if you're not on location. If you want to learn about the Brooklyn Bridge, don't take Ken Burns' Brooklyn Bridge Detour. Go watch his documentary. It's something that's made for that medium. Yeah. Instead of hearing Ken Burns say, "Look at that! Isn't that something?" when you have no idea what he's talking about.
Are there applications that you think where it might make sense to take snippets of what's happening or create a detour, and maybe you could do a consolidated version and have that just sort of be a sneak peek on the podcast, and that maybe would lead people as a way to move people into Detour?
Yeah, and we experimented with that, and we experimented with audio views and reviews, and tried to come up with something. But there's always been a challenge with Detour of you're going against people's preconceived notions of audio tours, which are usually based on some mediocre experience they had at a museum, and people's preconceived notions of walking tours in general, which is maybe you're with a bunch of other tourists from Iowa and Kansas, and they go on too long, and there's a volunteer tour guide who's on college break, and they can be incredible, but they're definitely hit or miss. And the way we do detours is we find somebody who's part of the history of the place. We do cinematic sound design, and they have a very, very explicit storyline to them with a beginning, a middle, and an end. They're really highly crafted. When people actually take them, they're usually blown away and go back and do more. But it's been a challenge to communicate that.
What has been was there like an aha for you as you when you launched Detour, and then we'll move into Descript. When you launched Detour, and now that it's been running, and things that you would change about how you're putting them together, or lessons learned, I guess, as people use it.
Well, one of the challenges we knew we were up against is everything in media and content and technology is about, like, all of the trends are about making things increasingly bite-sized, increasingly low friction to get in and out of. Mm-hmm. And we were doing this audacious thing in that we were saying, no, we want you to travel for 10, 20, 30 minutes to get to a location and then do something for 2 hours and then drive back. So it's this huge time commitment. You probably don't have a good sense of what the experience is going to be like before you can't really demo an on location experience before you're actually on location. So there's a high risk that you're going to be wrong. So super high friction. I don't know how you solve that. We tried a bunch of different ways to solve it, but we knew it was going to be a challenge. The risk is just getting to the right customer at the right time when they're looking for something like that. I think the idea will eventually be very popular. I hope that Detour can be one of the companies that makes it popular, but there's some real customer acquisition challenges in reaching the customer that's looking for something like that at the right time.
So can you tell me where you were when the idea came up for Descript?
I don't know where I was. It was we always saw Detour as eventually becoming a platform where anybody could produce content. We were producing our content early on to eat our own dog food and to try to understand what was involved. But the idea is we would do that and then use that experience to develop tools that catered to that production process, and then open the platform up so that anybody could create stuff. And as we started working with audio, we quickly realized how inaccessible and tedious the tools were. My background before I started Groupon, my college degree is in music technology, and then I worked in a recording studio for a couple of years. So I thought I had a pretty good handle on audio, but working with voice like most of these tools are designed for music, and voice is an afterthought. Yeah. And we would do voiceover sessions in this booth that I'm sitting in right now, and the session might last half a day, and then you would spend another day or another 2 days editing down that session. And that's with a professional audio engineer who understood how to think in waveforms. Yeah. And we just realized that was going to be a non-starter. So we knew that there were these incredible advances happen in speech-to-text recognition. And we asked ourselves, would it be possible to build an audio editor that looked like a word processor and acted like a word processor? Because that's kind of the one creative tool that everybody understands how to use. Yeah. And we looked around and we found someone getting his PhD at UC Berkeley in specifically this idea. And we hired him and spent a couple years building this and beta testing it with our Detour producers. And then people would be coming through the office and seeing what we were building, anybody that was working in audio or even video, and they would just light up when they saw Descript, and we would hear things like, I've been asking for this for 20 years and I had this idea and blah, blah, blah. And it just felt like the kind of thing where we were clearly onto something, and really just something that people had a kind of inevitability to it couldn't exist until the technology reached a certain crossed a threshold.
Makes sense.
And it had just crossed that threshold. So the more we thought about it, and the more we thought about how audio production could be easier and faster and more fun by changing the editing and creation paradigm, the more excited we got about the possibilities.
So I've been testing it out. It's been really interesting, and obviously having been in podcasting now for close to 4 years, and I've seen a wide range of tools come and go, and especially in the podcasting space, which gets pretty hot, and people try to capitalize on that. So there's tools like Trint, which you're probably aware of, and Rev.com does a lot of manual transcribing. So now they've moved into an automated tool called Temi, which I don't know if you're aware of that, TEMI.com. What's interesting is those are just obviously fully transcribing, but they're only as good as the machine learning that's behind the transcription. And so I know that for Descript, it's the ability to cut out a word and it'll edit the pieces together. What I was playing around with was with the idea of inserting as well, and I think it inserted like a robotic voice of me. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what the thought process is, and if you think of those as two separate work streams, like where you're just deleting and another one where you actually have to add new content.
So the version of Descript that's out right now will do automatic transcription, and it's very affordable. It's the most accurate automatic transcription that we've found, and fast. You can transcribe a couple hours of audio in less than minutes. And then once you have a transcript, that's really just the beginning. You can then edit audio by editing the text. So the way that people are using that now is you might have a long interview or a conversation like this one, and it goes on for a long time, and you want to cut it down to 10 minutes or whatever. And Descript is an excellent tool for doing that sort of thing. What we're working on and where we want to take it is full multi-track support. So you can have many channels of voices, so you can have music and ambience. But what we're seeing right now is people using it sometimes just purely for transcription. And then a lot of times anybody that's working in audio, it's a great starting point for any voice audio that you're working with, for editing it down. You can then make all your edits in Descript. In addition to the script-based edits, there's a waveform editor that you could use to fine-tune your region boundaries and add crossfades. And then you can export it to one of the formats that's readable by Pro Tools or Audition or Logic, open it there and see all of your edits preserved so that you can continue doing any fine-tune editing there, or add music or whatever you want to in your DAW of choice.
And just thinking from a workflow perspective, on a lot of podcasters, they love to be this idea to have this seamless transition. So I'm working with a company now that is sort of like a streaming Skype competitor, like Zencaster. They're called Squadcast. And they're interesting, because they have the audio. It's going to be recorded, and then the ideal place to move it to would be a tool like Descript, because it's the audio. Now let's get it transcribed, and then the natural progression for a podcaster is to move that to show notes, to move that to the hosting company, be it Libsyn or Blueberry or wherever you're hosting your files. So, are you thinking about workflow and maybe like Zapier integration for automation down the line as well?
We are. I mean, there's so much that we want to do. Maybe it'll be interesting to talk a little bit about the workflow that our Detour producers used, because we actually have a bunch of features that we built for the Detour use case that we ripped out of the first version of Descript so that we could polish and have a minimum viable product that felt really polished, and then add those features back in. So Detours were predominantly scripted, meaning that it starts with the producer writing a script and then recording to that script. And producers would actually, writing in Word or Google Docs, would write that script directly in a Descript composition. And then when it was done, they would go into the recording studio and record, and then take that audio file and drag it on top of the script, and not actually use the transcription. They would just align to the existing script. And then once that's in place, they would be working with an editor, and we have cloud-based version control and collaboration tools built into that again we haven't released yet for the proper Descript app, but it's out there for Detour producers, where you can check in your file to a central cloud-based repository, and then other collaborators can check it out. So we usually had a producer, an editor, a sound designer, maybe a couple other people, all simultaneously working on this project. And an editor would go, and there's also commenting, like Google Doc style commenting on audio, which is amazing. And you would be writing your comments in there. An editor might go in and delete a sentence of audio text and then type in, this is getting to your last question, and then they would type in what they wanted to say instead.
Yeah.
And it would put in scratch audio that's just generated from a synthesized robo voice. And then it's highlighted in red. So then the producer or the voiceover artist can look at their script and see all of the pickups that they need to record. And then they go back into the studio and they record just those pickups.
Okay.
And all of this stuff is stored in version control. So it's really easy to go back if you made any changes that you don't like. So by working hand in hand, not only with these Detour producers, but I mean, they're all radio producers. They're all podcast producers is where we hired out of. And it gave us a really intimate idea of the workflow is like and how we can improve upon it. Another example is like when a reporter is reporting a story, a lot of times they're going out into the field and recording a lot of interviews. And the flow right now is you bring those interviews back, you send them off to get them transcribed if you can afford it. If you can't, you get them hand transcribed, or you transcribe them yourself. And then you listen back to the audio. And as you're listening, you highlight the selects in the Word document that you think you're going to want to use. And you have your timestamps that are in there. And then later when you're writing your script, you're pulling that text into your script along with the timestamps. And then after that, you're going into Pro Tools and you're looking up the timestamps in the original audio files. It's like you're managing all these different parts, and it's a really full engineering kind of process. Yeah. And with Descript, you can just take your interviews, drag the files into one Descript project, get transcripts, highlight the bits you want to, and actually like start composing your script right away in that Descript project where the audio and the text are always linked. So you don't need to think about them as separate things. And there's this really interesting thing that happens as you start using Descript, which is that you're in your editorial brain almost all the time. And you're very rarely in this engineering brain that just looking at a waveform immediately puts you in. And so it's a more creative, expressive, and efficient process, frankly.
And is there some machine learning that's involved? Because as people, sometimes when you replace words, if that happened consistently, I would think that there might be a way to see that as an opportunity to learn from what people are manually correcting on a regular basis.
Absolutely. Like there's a huge amount of opportunity for that. We're not doing, other than the text audio alignment, we're not doing any particularly fancy machine learning stuff right now. Okay. Like you hear when you read about these automatic transcription services, a lot of them throw around terms like machine learning and artificial intelligence. And the thing to keep in mind is that all of these services are using one of the same handful of transcription backends that are provided by the big companies. We use Google. Okay. Some people use Nuance or IBM. Amazon just came out with one.
Are you familiar with Speechlytics?
Speechmatics.
Speechmatics, yeah, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, that's another popular one. Yep. We've tested them all, and a lot of what we focused on building is just infrastructure for understanding which ones are the best and the ability to switch them in the case. And we're using some Google stuff that's just incredible, as one would think. I mean, they have this massive training library in all their YouTube videos and everything else that they use to create these models. And that's why it like makes sense to use these third-party APIs. It's just very hard for a startup to have access to that kind of training data. They would be able to compete.
Yeah, it makes sense. Have you thought about how you're going to market it? Because obviously it's something that's very attractive to podcasters and journalists. And I'm wondering if you had a target audience in mind as you started putting it together.
Well, for starters, we're focused on anybody that needs to get transcription. That's a really obvious market. And the quality of automatic transcription has crossed this threshold where it's really usable at this point, especially when it's linked to the audio. We also offer what we call white glove transcription. But if you if you aren't happy with, if you have a really low quality audio and automatic transcription doesn't cut it, you can upgrade to human powered transcription, and it ends up costing $1 a minute. We deduct the cost of your automatic transcription, so there's no risk in trying automatic transcription first. And then the other target audience right now is anybody that's working with audio as their medium. So radio podcasters, it even in its current form, it's a really powerful tool to add to the top of your voice workflow, even if you're going to end up eventually exporting to Pro Tools or Audition. Over the long term, I mean, we see this shift to a script-driven interaction model away from a timeline-driven interaction model where you're looking at waveform abstractions as something that is inevitable. It's, for the same reason that people aren't writing code in binary anymore. They're writing it using text and words. It just makes sense. Like, words are a better abstraction than a waveform in most cases. So we see just anybody that's creating talk-driven media is going to want to use a tool like Descript to do it in the future. And we hope that that's not only the people that are using these tools today, but that we can, by making it so much more easy and accessible, we can introduce a whole slew of new creators to audio production.
Yeah, it's interesting, this thought that you brought up, that when you're working in text and then you switch over to, and I grew up DJing, so I did some music production, and there's a different mindset, because when you get sucked into the logistics of the tool, like how do I cut and edit a waveform, and how do I make sure that they get married together so they sound good, and then you get sort of pulled into this other part of your brain thinking, as opposed to like when you're looking at words and you're tight, like, if you're writing up something, then I feel like you need different skill sets for those. And I think, to your point, you have to keep shifting back and forth. Like, am I not understanding the tool? That's why I can't edit this audio. And you just get lost, and you can't really get any work done.
Yeah. And our goal, as we release new features over the next year, is to make editing audio feel as costless and frictionless, if that makes sense, as it is to just edit text in a word processor. The superpower that people that work with print as their primary medium have is that when you're writing in a word processor, like, editing is as easy as the original writing process, right? You can write something, and if you don't like it, you can delete a word or move stuff around, and it's this thoughtless, frictionless process. And we want to bring that same power to audio, and that means getting really smart about how we splice things together to make sure that they always sound great.
Yeah, it's funny, because I see there's something there's, without knowing the specifics and the what's happening on the technical side, but I can see that some of the words are underlined with like a dotted line, and as I changed the words, I can see that you were that Descript was moving stuff around, and so were you? Is it you're actually aligning the timestamp of the text to what you feel is the most appropriate waveform or something? Am I getting that right?
Exactly. Yeah. So if you go in and you type, you correct a typo, or you change the text of a word, Descript will do a phonetic analysis of the words that you've typed in the audio waveform and line it up so that we know we have a timestamp for the starting and end point of every phoneme inside of every word.
And this is technology that existed already, or is this just something that you learned a lot through Detour and you've just been perfecting it now with Descript?
Yeah, like I said, we hired someone a couple years ago who had been doing his PhD in this stuff, and so the technology has existed, but it's largely existed in research departments and academia, and we're trying to productize it.
You mentioned earlier when you were talking to Alex Bloomberg how this was pre-Gimlet, which is interesting because anyone who listens to Startup, that first season, is really fascinated by the journey that he's taken. So what was it that caught your eye afterwards? Because if you didn't see it when you're having those initial discussions with him, obviously you see it now. So what are you seeing that has you excited specifically about the podcasting space?
some of it just from talking to other people in audio, and getting a sense of the actual numbers, that there really has been a quantifiable jump in listening, really, with the instigating event being free data plans on cell phones.
Yeah.
From what I understand.
Yep.
And from that point on, it's just been up and to the right. And then I think there are a number of trends that are just starting to form that are going to continue to propel audio forward as a medium. One of the ones that I'm the most excited about is wireless, like super low friction wireless headphones, such as the AirPods.
Yeah.
Like, as a user, it's been eye-opening to me how much more frequently I'm using headphones, because something as simple as taking the wire away, not needing to untangle it every time you take it out of your pocket. Yeah. I'm much more likely to listen to 5 minutes of a podcast or something like that when I'm taking a walk to get a cup of coffee. So I think that trend, in addition to cars and everything else that people already talk about, is just going to keep creating new opportunities for audio first experiences in people's lives.
And what are your some of your go-to podcasts?
Gosh, I don't have anything really unique. It's pretty standard. My favorite two podcasts are The Daily, just because it's such a profoundly different theory in how to communicate news, and what it should feel like to communicate news. And the Sam Harris podcast, which I love because it's just so rare that you can listen to such long, nuanced conversations between smart people on interesting subjects.
Yeah, those are two good ones. I want, just changing gears a little bit here. Obviously, you've had success with previous companies, and I'm wondering if it's just something that's in your DNA, like this need to create. And you've done it with Groupon, you've done it with Detour, and now you're back at it with Descript. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit, because we have a lot of folks who are entrepreneurs as well that listen, and I'm wondering if that's just something that's in your blood.
I mean, I don't have any other blood, so it's hard to compare. I don't know what the absence of whatever it is would feel like, that I can confirm that. I can say that I feel really lucky to be alive in a time when this incredible medium of the internet is so nascent, and there are so many. Like, just as a creative person, I started out thinking I was going to be a musician, and then ended up transferring to focusing on the internet, because it felt like this incredible blank canvas. Like, there's so many opportunities to have ideas and then bring those ideas into existence where nobody has tried that specific thing before, as opposed to music, which it was just incredibly crowded with millennia of contributions. So it's just really exciting. I guess I'm just I like making things, and the internet is a really fun place to be making things.
Do you remember is there someone, I'm sure there's been a lot of folks, but I'm wondering if you can think of anyone that's been a good mentor for you as you've been working through your journey, your entrepreneurial journey and your business journey. If there's someone that comes to mind that's been helpful for you, sort of like someone you could talk to, or a guiding light along the way.
This is a kind of an answer to your question. I was just thinking about this the other day. So when I was in college, I had an internship and later worked at Electrical Audio Recording Studios in Chicago, which is run by a guy named Steve Albini, who's a musician and an engineer who's known for recording Nirvana and the Pixies, and he's kind of like has a cult following. And I had a lot of admiration for him before starting the job. And then when I worked there, what struck me was just how incredibly hardworking he was, and the culture of that place, not just him, but the other people that worked there. So people would kind of like wake up, like he lived at the studio at the time, and he would wake up and he would have a cup of coffee, and then he would go into the studio and he would work 14, 16-hour days, like seriously from 10 or 11 or 12 in the morning until 2 in the morning, and do that 330 days a year or something.
Wow.
And it was eye-opening in the sense of, it was like, oh, that's how you become good at something. You just work really, really hard. You do it a lot.
Yeah.
And seeing that firsthand had a huge impact on me. And then as I went through my career, I followed it. I learned to get comfortable working really hard and being incredibly persistent. And that served me well.
What have you learned from your previous experiences that you're going to apply in terms of what to do and what not to do, especially with Descript and the team? Because obviously all these teams start small, right? And then there's a lot of excitement and there's a lot of like constant communication, and then as you've experienced, as the team grows, the dynamics change. So I'm wondering if you've thought about what you would do, if anything, different as the team grows.
One thing I learned a lot about at Detour was the differences between the way that creative, like content producers work versus the way that people like me tend to work, who are more, I don't know, on the engineering or business side. I was an engineer for a little while earlier on, but I still kind of have that mentality to some degree, or a technical mentality in how I do things. And I try to be a process oriented person who's all about optimizing everything that I do. Like I have a routine that I do in the morning and at night, and I set goals for myself every day, and I set goals for myself every week. And I write all this stuff. I have like a framework for how to live that I'm always iterating on and trying to find ways to improve. And I think about business a lot of times in that way too. Like, when you're figuring out how to launch hundreds of Groupon cities, you're trying to come up with a playbook for how to launch and run a city that you're optimizing and you repeat. And when we started making this long form content for Detour, I had that same kind of mentality. And I remember even just recently at Third Coast Festival, I saw Ira Glass give a talk where he talked about how chaotic their process. One of the things he talked about was how chaotic the process at This American Life is, and how it really hasn't gotten any less chaotic from when they started. Like it's still just as based in chaos. And I heard that and I thought, like, that totally resonates with what I saw in terms of content production. It totally seems right on. And also, I'm so glad that I'm not a content producer because like there are people who are really good at that. And I guess it's just part of the process. In fact, like I have a healthy respect in just the coming up with data that resonates with people for a business is very much like that, where a lot of times your first idea is terrible and it doesn't matter. It just matters that you try it. Like, Groupon was a pivot from another company. And if the 25-year-old me pitched the 37-year-old me on that original idea, I would have said, that's terrible. Don't do it. It's a waste of your time. But if the 25-year-old version of me hadn't done that, then he wouldn't have gotten himself in a mess out of which Groupon would have been born. Yeah. So what have I learned? I guess I'm just saying that I have a healthy respect for the different kind of creative processes that, or work processes that people need to have in order to succeed in their relative field.
Makes sense. So does that mean you're ruling out starting your own podcast?
We need to. I think we need to have some kind of a podcast. I don't here at Descript. We actually do one internally, just for our employees, so we can eat our own dog food and use the tools. And that's what it's really about for us. And there's a lot of podcasts out there, so I don't think we would start one publicly unless we felt like we had an idea that just was unique and special enough that it needed to exist.
Yeah, we do production for clients as well, and I always curious about what's their objective, because some people want to do it as a hobby, and then most people want to do it to help their business or get get interest. And I think there's this, it's valuable if it's almost like what's the I tell clients, what's the one actionable thing you want someone to do as a result of having listened to the podcast, and that would be like, go try out the tool, or go try it, for people that have companies like yourself. So it's been interesting because there's such an intimate medium, and just the fact that we're having this conversation here, I feel there's a warmth to long form conversations, and you've probably finding this with some of the podcasts you listen to. So that's why I was asking, because I think your story is a great one, and I think as more people tend to hear it, the impact you can have. And the accessibility of voice, I think 80 to 85% of podcasts are consumed on mobile now. So it's walking the dog, traffic, making dinner, at the gym. I just think there's a lot of opportunities for people that may not even know you, and would come to discover you through a podcast.
Yeah, I love the medium. I get a greater sense of understanding from the content that I consume on audio than video, or certainly print. I mean, getting the daily, it was so profound for me to start listening to the daily. Like, it's like, oh, maybe after you listen to 20 minutes of, like, you read the newspaper for 20 minutes and you're just angry and feeling great, like incredible judgment towards everything.
Yeah.
And what if it didn't have to be that way? What if you actually felt like a kind of sense of understanding, and not exactly compassion, but like the non-compassionate form of empathy, where you can at least put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's different with you. And I think the daily is such a incredible success story in that theory. And I would love, and making it entertaining. So I'd love to see more in what we do at Descript to help enable more of that type of content. Would be a really rewarding way to spend time.
Is this idea of showing empathy, is that a trait you look for in people, or important for you?
Is it this idea of what?
Empathy.
Showing? What about it?
Just having empathy, and a lot of people, I think, to your point, a lot of problems in the world could probably be avoided if we all had just a little bit more of that. And I just love the fact that you pointed it out, because I think so many times we're so quick to jump in with our opinion about how we think things should be, without even putting ourselves in people's shoes and saying, well, maybe they have this perspective because of the where they grew up, or the life they've had in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I got schooled in that at Groupon, because before I started Groupon, I was getting a degree in public policy at the University of Chicago, and the impetus for that was basically arming myself with the tools and depth of knowledge to better convince everybody else in the world why I'm right. And it's really easy to get in that kind of mindset when you're just an armchair quarterback, which is all that any of us are when it comes to policy and politics. Mm-hmm. Then, fast forward a few years later, and I'm running a company with 13,000 employees. And, I remember certain times when I would come to a quick judgment about somebody doing something stupid or crazy or whatever. And then it might be a year later, and I'd get the context on what was going on, and some other bits of information that I wasn't armed with, and realized that what an asshole I'd been for judging them in that way, and that I'd made the wrong decision in some cases. And, there's something about actually being accountable, needing to make decisions and being accountable, that forces you to reckon with that and have this kind of gift of an experience of realizing that, oh, actually, it's pretty uncommon that problems happen because somebody is evil or crazy or stupid. It's usually something else is going on. And to your point, I think we're often very happy to stop with that explanation that this person is crazy or bad or whatever it is, and not look to the deeper issues. So I agree with you.
So a couple of questions as we wrap up. What's the one most misunderstood thing about you?
Gosh, I have no idea, because first of all, in some regards, I go out of my way to be misunderstood. Check out my album. um, but in other regards, I invest no time in trying to understand how I am understood.
Yeah.
And in fact, I find like that engaging in that would be so repulsive to my ego that that it's like even thinking about this question is giving me the shivers.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to come on. I'm really excited about what it is you're doing with Descript. And was it a conscious decision to have it pronounced that way as opposed to Descript?
I'm kind of non-committal about how to pronounce it. You're welcome to have a strong opinion and castigate people for pronouncing it in the way that you wish it weren't.
Makes sense. So I always ask if there's a way, if there's something you'd like the listener to do. Typically I ask if there's a way for folks to get in contact with you, but I imagine that would be a bit overwhelming for you. But is there something specifically with Descript that you'd like listeners to do as far as a next step to engage with the tool?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, download Descript. You can use it for free. There's 30 minutes of free transcription, and all of the audio editing features are free in a demo mode. And it's actually really easy to get in touch with me right now. I do all customer service for Descript. So if you write into customer service, you're going to hear back from me. That's usually great. In 10 or 20 minutes. I love doing it, and I love working on this product and hearing what people think. And I've never done a product like Descript. Like everything else I've done, you're imagining some kind of behavior and making a bet on the fact that other people are going to be into it. But with Descript, we're really it's like a better mousetrap. It's a better solution for something that an acute problem that a lot of people already deal with. And we feel like 95% of success is figuring out how to listen to our users and communicate with our users and let them give us the ideas that are the most important. If we were just in a vacuum, and we'd have no shortage of things to do. We have incredibly cool ideas for stuff to build into Descript, but we don't know what the most important stuff is. That's what you guys know. So it's a real opportunity for you to shape Descript into your dream audio production tool. And I'd encourage you to write long essays with all the things that you wish that you had, so that we can all read them.
Well, the podcasting community has no shortage of feedback and opinions just from the experience that I've had in the 4 years about tools that have come and gone and ways to improve them. So I think they're going to definitely take you up on that offer.
Awesome.
So again, thank you so much for taking the time to be on here. This is incredibly helpful and exciting to see folks like you jumping into this space. And I'm excited about what you've got planned. And thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate Andrew taking the time from what must be an incredibly busy schedule with the launch of this new project to come on the show and just be generous with just sharing information about what's working, what's not. And I'm honored to have the ability to talk to someone like him who's got a lot of experience from a startup perspective, from an entrepreneur perspective, running a huge business, the ups and downs that go with that. It was just really an entertaining conversation, and I'm glad I had the opportunity to share it with you. Intro and outro music composed by Cedar and Soil. Check out his full music at cedarsoil.com. Don't forget to support our episode sponsor, Podbean, at podbean.com/podcastjunkies. Tune in next week for our conversation with Charles Beckwith. Charles and I met at the LA Podfest, and he's the host of American Fashion Podcast. He's the founder of Mouth Media Network, and they're working on a new podcatcher app called the Mouth Player, which he demoed for me at LA Podfest, and it's amazing looking. So we get to talk about all that stuff. Really great conversation. He's really has his finger on the pulse of podcasting as it relates to the fashion industry, and what he's done with the network is really, really impressive. So I think you'll really enjoy that conversation. If you made it this far, you're no doubt holding on for dear life in the hopes that I'm going to let you have the retention hashtag. This week, hashtag Descript Andrew, DESCRIPT Andrew, and you can tag him at Andrew Mason, one word. That's his Twitter handle, ANDREWMASON. And of course, us at podcast_junkies. Thank you so much for everything you do. If you have not yet subscribed to the newsletter where I send updates on upcoming episodes, head on over to podcastjunkies.com/8tools. And if you're already a member of the newsletter posse, head on over to podcastjunkies.com/iTunes, and you can leave a review and I'll read them out like I did last week. In case you missed it, I was reading reviews. So that's how it works. You write it, I read it. Have a fantastic day, guys.